organization that covers the events in the city from a social justice perspective. I want to note before we begin the panel tonight that unfortunately Nicole Townsend from Southerners on New Ground was unable to make it. So to start with, I'd like to give each of our panelists kind of a chance to introduce themselves and talk about what work they do and how they got involved in queer activism. We'll just go down the road here.
Well, my name's Rosie Coates, and I've been around for a while, and I apologize, I broke my glasses in the elevator. But I've been around since the basically the from college days, the mid '70s, and I guess when O. Henry's first opened, and the After Dark was there, and we would come from Western Carolina University and be terrified and go to the back of the bar, which all the doors back then were at the back of the bar so that nobody saw you going in, because it was a lot different time. Most of us were going to be school teachers, so at Western you could be blackballed if you came out. They even thought you were gay. Even though there were gay instructors there, you still would have been blackballed, and you wouldn't have got good credentials, and you wouldn't have been able to get a teaching job. It wouldn't be on paper, but it would have been word of mouth. And we all knew that. Well, we came over here to dance and just do this and that. And I have a list of all the bars that started from the Flaming Embers in the 60s. That was at Patton Avenue, down there where Seymour is. BJ's was at the corner of McDowell and that little street where Ben's is on. The After Dark was on. BJ's was, downtown. Then the After Dark. Then O. Henry's. Then Cabaret Act 1. Then Tracks. Then Scandals. Then the Hitching Post at the same location as Tracks. And Tracks and the Hitching Post. Then Hairspray, which Tracy Narth was one of the owners of Hairspray. And then it was Hairspray Metro. And O. Henry's has been around since 1976. And the current owner, Derek Boyd, bought it 6 years ago in 2013. And back in the old days at the original O. Henry's at 59 Haywood Street, that was our church. That was where people got married. That was where we had wakes. It was a place that, back when AIDS was prevalent, when I came back from the Army, a friend of mine was the first person that got on stage and said, I have AIDS, and you're going to hear a lot about this disease. And he had been basically thrown out of San Francisco, and he was from Weaverville, but they told him about 1981 or 2, get out. In Los Angeles and San Francisco, they didn't have the health care, they didn't have support, so they said, if you have a home to go to out of the state, you don't own property here, get out. So that was my start with what was soon to be later WinCap. And O. Henry started having benefits, and we would, do 600, 700, 800,000. They started basically the auction in the basement, and it ran 10 years. And the year we peaked 10,000 2 years in a row, Pete and Steve was approached by Harry Brown, and he said, well, it could be bigger if it could be somewhere else in a different venue where a lot of straight people, a lot of entrepreneurs might feel more comfortable participating. And so they handed it over to Harry at that point, and he was absolutely right. The last auction I worked with WinCap, I think we cleared 120,000 after everything was done. But in the beginning, it was like you checked the street before you went to your car. You checked the street when you went in the bar. Sundays they would open the door, and people from out of Asheville, little towns out of Asheville, or whether it be the farthest Campbell or the farthest Marshall, would come and do things like throw smoke bombs in the bar. They would come in the bar, kick the doors open, and come in and just hit the first person they saw in the bar stool and knock them off. So that being, we kept baseball bats, 2x4s, anything that we could grab that we would chase them down the street, would shock them because we were supposedly a bunch of pussies. And, and they found out real quick that a man in high heels can run pretty damn fast. And so that set a groundwork, and we were kind of like the cult of Asheville, people that had businesses and were considered reputable back then. We're a little bit nervous about O. Henry's, but we always gave money, we always donated, we were there if somebody died. Because of the AIDS for the AIDS benefits, people I've been to at the hospital when nobody would touch the body. The funeral home would show up and they wouldn't touch them to put them in the body bag, so the people there, their loved ones and support people would put them in the body bag, and then they would double body bag it because they were terrified. And Mars is the one over here on Maryland Avenue, right, Mars?
Yeah.
Their son was a friend of Pam Amiot, which is the very first lesbian I ever met in Asheville, true lesbian. And she waited tables at the after dark, and she was full speed, wide ahead, from the beginning. And she was a friend of the owner's son, and he said, we will do it. We will cremate them, because nobody would cremate them. They couldn't bury them. They couldn't do anything, and you had the funerals at an odd time so that you wouldn't attract attention. So, you know, after that, and I met at a funeral, at Tommy's funeral, my best friend, and we were leatherettes. He was, you know, we were crazy, nutty friends, and at his funeral I met Dan and Joan Marshall, and, you know, they were with All Souls for years and years and years, and I realized that there's another side of religion that is inclusive to gay people, which I had never experienced that since I grew up in a Pentecostal Baptist church in Franklin, North Carolina, which is very radical right still to this day. But, you know, my experience of Asheville growing, it's grown in leaps and bounds. When
And we're have some different questions about the growth in Asheville and how it's affected things. So
sure.
This is a really, really important history, and we're going to delve into a little bit more specifically later.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Sure. Let me pass the microphone down?
Please.
Sure will.
Hey y'all, my name is Lauren Peter. I moved here from upstate South Carolina, kind of like the Greenville, Anderson area, if most familiar, about 3 years ago, and I've been working as the social justice director for Transmission ever since. And Transmission is just a nonprofit that exists here in Asheville since, I think, 2001. We help people with name changes, we have a lot of support groups, a lot of social events, stuff like that, so yeah.
So I'm Lisa Morphew. I came to Asheville in about 1989 and got involved with Community Connections, the paper, and worked as, you know, just a writer and editor for a little bit. And then later on down the road, I wound up with the paper and worked probably, I think, about 8 years on that paper. And during that time, the Pride started and various other things, and so I photographed all of those. So I had this huge archives that I gave to Zoe a while back. All the Community Connections from the beginning up until it ended, as well as Asheville on Broadway, which Greg Heller, myself, Kermit Brown started to raise money for direct services with people living with AIDS. And direct services meant things like, oh, you know, we need an electric blanket, we need this. One year we bought electric blankets for all the AIDS patients in Haywood County. So we did Asheville and Broadford for about 5 years. Greg died after the 3rd year of a heart attack. He also had AIDS, but he had a heart attack. And I kept it going for a couple more years. But I've been involved off and on in all kinds of things. But primarily I'm an artist and a photographer, so that was what my main impetus for being involved was. Keeping the paper going was not easy. Everybody has their own idea of what a LGBTQA paper should look like. But there's other problems that you have, and that is getting it printed in small towns. So we first were at the Citizen Times. We got kind of kicked out of the Citizen Times. I did the Iwana briefly, we got kicked out of there. And then we went to Waynesville. Now you would think Waynesville would be the hardest place. And it was interesting when you walked in because people all stared at you. But they did the paper, but they had rules that a lot of people didn't realize. So sometimes people would think I didn't put their picture in because it was too racy for me. It wasn't too racy for me. There's not much that's too racy for me. I couldn't get it printed. And so some of the things that people thought I might be doing had absolutely nothing to do with me. It had to do with what I could get printed. But we also had wonderful people. Michael wrote for the paper for years, Holly Boswell for the trans community. I think it was very important, and my main impetus for keeping it going as long as I did was that kids could pick it up. It was everywhere for a long time. We were in a lot of places. And there were a lot of kids that came into town that had nobody, that had gotten kicked out of their homes, that had nowhere to go, and they could pick up the paper and realize that there was a community here for almost anyone of any particular persuasion. So that was important to me. And I was at a thing this weekend. I missed Pride for the first time. This is the first one I didn't photograph. But I was working with the hookers of the Mary Mountain Rug Hookers. And one of the women works at the church on Haywood that has the minister that does a lot of the homeless people. There are 800 homeless kids in Asheville. Of those, you know that a huge percentage are gay and lesbians who have been gay, lesbians, trans people who have been kicked out of their homes. So it's really important to keep community going and to build places for people to be safe, to feel included, et cetera, and so on. So I'll pass it to
Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Harney. I came from the Hampton-Newport News area of Virginia along the coast. People say, was it Hampton-Newport News? We always call it Hampton-Newport News. I got here in 1992 at the behest of my friend Patricia Adele. She and I had gone to Belmont Abbey College down near Charlotte. And she asked me to come and paint her house and build a garden, and I never left. One of the first jobs I had here was with the Blue Ridge Community Health Services that used to be called the Migrant Clinic down in Hendersonville, and I did groundskeeping. But because I'm fluent in Spanish, I was able to do some of the outreach with their nurses to do some HIV testing and some TB testing after hours. So we did that at some of the apple camps and some of the other agricultural camps there. And I left for 1 semester more in Richmond, Virginia, and to finish up a second degree. And I came back here the night after the Gay Liberation March in Washington, D.C., so in 1993. I drove directly from Washington, D.C. That, if you were there, you remember how thrilling it was. And when I got here, I couldn't sleep that night. And I wrote my first letter to the editor describing who I am, why I was here, what I had just experienced. So to go back and find that in the Citizen Times, you would find under Michael Harney my first letter to the editor. But I had always written letters, and as Lisa said, some years later I wrote a column that was entitled What the Rubber Man Wrote. So I could ask you, have you read What the Rubber Man Wrote? And most people were like, I don't think so. I was like, yeah. But it went on for about 10 years that way. I was very lucky to have gotten a job with the Western North Carolina AIDS Project back in 1993. I've always been known to have 3 or 4 jobs because I'm always afraid I'm going to get fired from one from my mouth. But I've always worked in the HIV and AIDS kind of realm. I worked in an area that we called here downtown the Cage. It encompassed this, what we call the Grove Arcade area, and kind of over toward the Indigo Hotel now stands there, and kind of it wrapped around. And it was a very sociable time period in this city. I met lots and lots of people. I always say I got my start in the streets of Asheville, you know, in the Cage. But I met many people there, and I was the outreach worker for the Western North Carolina AIDS Project. So it was my job to try and stop some of the Johns and get them to talk a little bit about HIV, their risks, to take a condom, maybe think about getting tested for what we knew was HIV and other STDs at the time. And then I teach Spanish at AV Tech in the Blue Ridge Community College. I found out I've been there for 26 years at AV Tech. I had no idea. We started what's called the Needle Exchange Program in 1994. Now it's 25 years old. And there's a guy named Marty Prairie Chicken. He was my boss and my mentor and my friend, and he's what gave me my start really here, and we talk a lot about him. But when he died in 2001, I made a promise the week before he died that I would continue to try to educate people, continue to try to distribute condoms, and to continue to try to operate what we started, the Needle Exchange Program of Asheville. I thought he was much too mean to die before me, but he died the next week, and so it wasn't AIDS related and hepatitis C related causes. Anyway, that's kind of a little bit of who I am, and certainly much more. I have been able to unload 6 or 7 boxes of old needle exchange history, some of my columns, things from the Western North Carolina AIDS Project photos here to the North Carolina room. I highly suggest and hope, encourage you to find something, whether you want to have a story transcribed here with the archives, or you have some things that you'd like to either donate or have digitized, that's part of the reason we're here tonight, is to encourage you to look back, to make sure that your name is there. If you're looking in the Mountain Express every week now, you see on one of those pages something about the history that happened here in 1923 and 1898 and 1917, things like that. So who will we be known as 50 and 100 years from now? I hope that you'll make sure that your name and others are involved.
Thank you.
I have to say, Michael, I'm the only lesbian that had 500 condoms in my car. From Michael.
So we'll alternate up who's answering kind of each of these questions. So I think the next one will go to Lauren, then we'll go on down from that. We'll start with Lauren. So Asheville, thank you all for the introductions. Asheville has a decades-long reputation for LGBT plus activism and safe spaces, including organizations, bars, clubs, and community spaces. But the fact is, queer communities here often face real danger and hardship as well, which y'all have already been talking about. In your view, what's the truth behind Asheville's reputation, and what's the reality of queer resilience here?
So I actually moved to Asheville after my high school guidance counselor told me that I would really like it because a lot of queer people kind of move here and make it home. And so I definitely think that it is a place that there are a lot of really nice queer people here that I met that have kind of just helped me become a better person. But I also think that the reality is that we still live in the Bible Belt, but we're still in the South. And so I don't think that the world is as progressive or even as like accepting as we'd like to think. So I think that's kind of the reason why we sometimes face a lot of backlash in this town.
Yeah, please.
You know, I moved to Asheville in '89. I've been out though. I moved from Cameron, North Carolina, where they made the Klan robes at that point. And my partner and I were out, and they called us those girls. And nothing, you know, not to be Pollyanna, nothing ever happened to us. I had a few weird things. Here, when I ran the paper, I did get some death threats. I would take them differently today than I did then. You know, I didn't take them as seriously. My home address, my telephone was in the paper, so they could call me. And sometimes I would try to talk to people that were threatening me, but usually it was just, you know, we're gonna get you. I never was terribly afraid. And in part because I've been out for so long and been so integrated in different communities, including farm communities and various communities, that I never, thank God, had anybody terrorize me. So, but I also know that a lot of people that I knew with the paper, when the paper happened, in one year, all the counties around us passed anti-gay resolutions. Davidson County, which I was surprised because of Davidson College, Madison County, they all passed anti-gay resolutions, which had no legal meaning, but people started to get hurt. And there was a gay male couple who had a guy come with a machete to their door. He didn't do anything, but you know, that kind of thing started. But now people have guns, and kids have guns, and you know, and you have a president that inflames people to do horrible things. If I got a death threat today, I would be terrified.
I'd say that I've been fairly lucky over the years. I certainly have been called faggot and malice. It's one thing we use the language amongst ourselves if you're part of the LGBTQIA plus whatever community. But to be called faggot and malice, it's hurtful. I mean, so I've had that happen. When I worked on the cage, it was usually at night. So at 5 o'clock, when the federal building closed, it became this, I say, public sex environment. It was, as I said, social. And up until 6:59 in the morning, it was that way. But all night long, people spun through there. And on occasion, you'd have some rowdy folks, particularly the weekends, but any night of the week, I was sprayed down with one of those big fat water guns. You know, I could have been acid for all I knew, but it didn't happen to have been. It was water. You know, you called names and thrown a beer can or something like that at you, faggot. I remember one time, law enforcement used to spin through there too. And I was leaning into somebody's car on the sidewalk, and I heard the car go by, and the officer said, "All faggots must go home." And I looked up, and he saw me, and I was like, "Oh, hell no, you didn't." And I wrote his car number down, and we reported him to the chief of police, who was Will Anarino at the time. And he had to come and apologize to us at the Western North Carolina AIDS Project. He was made to come to our staff meeting, and he said he was very sorry. He was just trying to kid around. He didn't mean it. He was here to support everybody, protect everybody. I really have never seen him again, so I don't know if they ended up having to leave the town or whatever. And overall, I've enjoyed living here in a what I feel like a fairly safe environment. We used to have many more rainbow flags flying. People had stickers on their cars. I don't see a lot of that anymore. People used to wear a lot more kind of rainbow jewelry and things. I fly a rainbow flag at my house and sometimes find dirty baby diapers on my driveway and stuff. I don't know if that's meant for me or if it's just somebody happened to throw it out of their window because they just changed the diapers in the car. I don't know, but it's happened like 10 times in the last 3 years, so it's kind of weird. Stuff like that I think happens sometimes, and I wish we could all figure out how to get along. If we could take these masks of skin and hair off, we'd find we're much more similar biologically than we are as we think we are just looking at one another. And I don't have to love you and you don't have to love me, but can't we just get along a little bit? That's kind of how I try to live.
Well, I guess I was more involved in the bar scene because that's where I felt comfortable, and mainly because I didn't feel comfortable in my skin except there. And I was a part of the first Pride and worked with all of them through there, and I've been security for the last 10 years. This is my 11th year, and I was security backstage, which is more fun than anything, but I experienced a lot of name calling. I've been called everything, and sometimes from gay men I've been called nasty names. And I try to stand up to people, or I try to converse with them and start some sort of, create an environment so that we're like, let's just take a deep breath. And if you don't take a deep breath, then I've got a baseball bat in my car. If we're going to go there, then if you're bigger than me, I'm going to be ready. And if that was the way it was, then they had to respect you for it. Because when I look at somebody, I take them at face value. I take them as they've got a history or a herstory. And I take them that I don't know where they've come from. I don't know what they've been through. And I don't know what made them, come at me or be angry with me. And I had that too. And through a lot of counseling through the VA, I've calmed down a lot. And I don't have triggers like I used to have that made me want to rear up and just say, hold up. But if I hear it going to somebody like Michael or anybody else, that's different. But I think Asheville has grown. I think we took a couple of steps back a couple of times. But for the most part, I say kudos to the people that started businesses in Asheville, whether it be Malaprops of Henry's, George Design, John Cram, and New Morning Gallery. They sustained themselves. They said, we're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere. Deal with it. George Vanderbilt had a big number of gay people working for him, and they partied over at the Rathskeller underneath O'Henry's. The downstairs was the bar where they were the only place they were allowed to go in Asheville. So it was a community of diversity in there back in that time. And I think those people kind of swung over and threw a blanket over us. And I came from Western after realizing that this is where I thought I belonged, because this is where my people were. And if I needed backup and I needed help and I needed a hug, this is where I was going to get it. And that's kind of my history.
It's worth mentioning, after I came out as a trans in 2016, my freelance career here disappeared overnight. And that includes from liberal publications as well. Just suddenly, it's interesting, the bigotry plays out in quiet ways as well as loud ones, and it's interesting, they never said a slur or anything, they just suddenly, the money disappeared. Fortunately, Asheville Blade subscribers still, then I could pay the bills. And I know myself and a lot of other trans women and non-binary and trans-masculine people still face violent harassment today in downtown, and it has honestly gotten, to my perception at least, worse during the tourism boom, not better. Before the next question, which I think gets into some really important aspects here, I do have to preface this with something, because the fact is, on Monday, a lot of the banks that were featured even at Pride put rainbow flags out, put those flags up, and went back to making money, including in Asheville, off of projects that evict queer people and queer communities off of prisons that incarcerate queer people and make life hell for a lot of other communities too. And when some queer activists started pointing this out at Pride, they were kicked out by the cops. So I think that's essential to kind of preface this next question. When talking about queer communities, we have to remember we are overwhelmingly talking about working class communities, especially queer communities of color. Many LGBT plus people live at or below the poverty line. It is estimated, and this is especially true in this city, that 40% of homeless youth identify as queer. And that's today. Now, Asheville is in the middle of a housing crisis. We have notoriously poor wages. How has Asheville's growth impacted queer communities both in the past, and what effect does gentrification have today?
Well, I can tell you my taxes went from $600 to $4,300. That's how it's affecting me. I really hate what's happening because not only the homeless people, but people that work, including myself, and I make a decent living, but you can't afford to stay here. And we're building these things. I think some of these hotels should have living spaces in them for the people that work there. I think there's not a vision of inclusiveness, and it's happening to the artists. You know, there was just a big article about the artists being moved out. It's like you come here. To me, gay and lesbian people really rejuvenated Asheville. We were some of the first people that put our money here.
And trans people as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. I think that, you know, people have got to realize if you want to have a workforce, you have to have housing that's affordable. And we keep building these hotels and this, that, and the other that could be places for low-income housing, and what they call low-income housing, good luck. Yeah, right. It's not low-income housing, not at all. And so I really am a champion for that. I sell real estate, so at this point in my life, and I have friends that want a $100,000 house. I have to go to Punka Punka to find them a $100,000 house, and it's really hard even out there. So I'm with you, I think. And in terms of safety, I think it's probably, in a lot of ways, gotten worse. In part because people have guns, in part because we have the internet that can inflame people from everywhere to pick on somebody they see as the most vulnerable. And I do think trans people are the most vulnerable of all of us. So, you know. And I think we have to fight for our trans community to be safe, to be included in an equal way, which sometimes that was hard in the beginning. I know Holly Boswell was a good friend of mine and found that difficult to be included and have us the same voice. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how to solve it except to take over the universe.
I don't know what to say either. It's economically, it's much more difficult. I have found it very difficult. I kind of teasingly say I have 3 jobs because I'm fearful of being fired, but from one, but it really takes me that to survive. Most people now are living 4 or 5 people deep, you know, in a small environment just to make ends meet. And wages are tough. The art community that I think built Asheville back is being stressed out and pressed away, and people want to come here to enjoy all of that and the artistic, keeping Asheville weird sort of scene. But then if we're being made fun of or being harassed or thought less of or outcast or segregated, what good is it? It just becomes another city. I mean, Asheville's becoming to me more and more like any city you name. It looks just like downtown Charlotte anymore. It looks like downtown somewhere Arizona. I don't care. It just is the same buildings. There's no, you know, the designs are all the same square, bland, plain colors, you know. I don't know. It's hard on people, and I don't know what the answer is. I really don't.
So I feel like I can't really say a ton about this because I just moved here 3 years ago, but from my understanding, Asheville used to be a place where queer people, like you would come, you would move here, you would kind of like, I guess, work in a restaurant and like start your life, whatever, and that's kind of what I did, but I feel like that was 2 years ago, and even with that just being 2 years ago, I don't think that I could do that now, just with the way that like the cost of living has gone up so much. And I also think it has a lot to do with wealthy business owners kind of like taking what they think Asheville is and like taking that like culture and commodifying it and then selling it to tourists. And so then tourists come here and eat at these like expensive restaurants and they spend like $27 on a salad. Meanwhile, like the dishwasher, the server's making like $3.13 an hour and is like living with 8 people in the house. So I guess I think that the answer to that is honestly going to city council meetings and just taking a stand for the city and just making sure that people know that, like, because I mean, yeah, tourism's cool and tourism brings in money, but also like we have to live here. So I think that's kind of the answer.
Well, I've been here 37 years, and when I bought my house, I paid $32,000 for it off of Charlotte Street. And now it's like, my taxes went up 32%, and I went to try to get them reduced. They're like, forget it. You live on the road, on the way to Grove Park Inn. So, you know, I'm like, I'm going to sell. So, but I think our communities, all the minority communities, all of our communities, all the small business communities, I think if we're going to go back like the 70s, I grew up when the hippies were running around and having communes, I think we need to pool our money and buy a building. I think we need to buy a bank. I think we need to buy things with clout so that we have a voice in this monetary system that Asheville has established. And then I think that, I know city council, that they get pulled every which way going, and you probably know how they're going to vote when you get there, because money talks and BS walks. That's just the reality of their life. But I don't really like what's happened to Asheville, but it's not going to change. I haven't ever been to anything on Cox Avenue, and I hadn't been down there in about, I don't know, I haven't been down there since all the other new places. I was like, holy crap, where'd all this stuff come from? And I used to read water meters for the city of Asheville, so I got to see all the great places and the dinky places and the drug dealer places up on the mountain and stuff. But Asheville needs to take a step back because their infrastructure wasn't good in the 90s. It couldn't carry it when Peach Knob was developing. A house with 13 rooms that had to have the same pressure all the way up Peach Knob as you do downtown. And, you know, that's stuff that's going to be expensive. And the people I know that have had rented spaces downtown, they're kicking us all out and they're running the rents up. It's doubling because they want to make the money to pay their building off. But eventually, I was here in the 70s when it was a ghost town downtown, and the only thing downtown was the city club at the top of the BB&T, O. Henry's, and then the Woodsman of the World had a handicapped working space where now Beer Garden is, which used to be Chickadee and Rye, and I worked there when it opened. But it can happen, and they think it can't, but it can happen, not overnight. It'll probably take it 4 to 5 years, but they need to really think about letting the people that have owned property for 30 years stop trying to run them out so that they can sell it to their friends, and try to let them do what we used to do in the old days, rent a room. You know, if you've got a big house, be able to rent the house as a commune or whatever. Let the homeowner do what they want, but make criteria and let them follow the criteria and tax it as it should be. But I think their eyes are wide, and I told somebody the other night, I said, it's like being, in a wonderful life. We've gone to that town that George didn't know who the hell anybody was, and all it was bar after bar after bar, and I'm like, just because it's a $7 beer doesn't make it any different. And that's the whole point, is that we've got to keep their ground and their feet under us and make sure people that do have the power to change things listen to us and listen to the old timers. I didn't ever think I'd be an old timer, but I'm 68, even though I don't feel it. But the people in their 80s know way more than I do, and that's the people we need to talk to and say, what do you think we ought to do? You've seen it all, and that's where we need to go. Is just don't stop trying. Stay together, get bigger, and make them listen to you, because you've got a big crowd of people that make sense.
On a side note here, I've covered City Hall for 13 years and 14 years now. And I remember just 8 months ago when a hotel moratorium was a crazy left-wing idea that would never happen. And they just passed it last meeting, and they passed it because a lot of locals, including a lot of queer locals, got very angry, stayed very angry, and refused to quiet down. At the same time, a dear friend of mine who's involved in has done a lot of good in this community, had to move 3 times last year because she was kicked out to make room for Airbnbs. And so I think it's worth keeping that fact in mind as well. I think a lot of cases, queer communities people are still here because we keep each other safe and organize, and as we mentioned several times already, we fight back. So on that note, Michael, if you would take this next question first. The histories and memories of queer communities have often been ignored or outright destroyed in the past. How is preserving those stories and realities important both for our communities and the story of the area as a whole?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, thank you to the library, to North Carolina Room, the archives, the official archives. So if we are not going to take the stand and the time that it may take to actually come and bring something to share our stories, our history, our artifacts, our photographs, our videos, whatever it is, they'll take it. I mean, like, I learned 6 boxes of stuff, I think. Is that right, Zoe? I don't, and probably have some more. In my will, it says, make sure that my calendars and things like that go to this archive. And so we are important, and how many of us are there, and how many of us die every day and every year? So how many of us are not going to be remembered? It's kind of like I think of the AIDS quote. I work with Western North Carolina AIDS Project and the Needle Exchange Program. And year after year, we have clients who die. If you don't make a quilt panel for them, it doesn't get added to the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. So if 700,000 people in this country alone have died of HIV and AIDS-related causes, and there are only 8,000 names on these panels, 48,000 panels, how many people are lost? What history is lost? It is up to us. I mean, you look up here, and this is not a full representation of our community, nor is it looking out at you. So where are the rest of our friends and family members and neighbors and colleagues and lovers? And if they don't want their names or faces seen or known or shown, maybe there are ways with pseudonyms, ways to get that history somehow recorded. I don't like militaristic words. I don't want to capture or execute something or target or aim, but how do we find one another and kind of share that history, whether it's with someone 80 or someone who's younger now, these next generations. They don't want to hear from a wrinkled old gray-headed man like myself about wearing condoms and safer sex and all that. They don't want to talk to me. But who's going to step in my shoes? I damn sure have the information. I can prove what I'm talking about. I got the facts. But who's the next inherent person? Who remembers wiping up vomit and diarrhea and sharing, time with people who were on their last, dying bed and those kinds of things? I mean, that was much of where I got my start in the work that I do. And each of us has these different experiences to share. I by no means think I can answer all the questions or even should even be up here talking so much tonight. Each of you could spend as much time telling your stories, and I hope that you will.
I think we have this incredible community, and we once with the paper did a census. And granted, it's probably not a regular census, but it came to us through people calling in that there were probably 50,000 lesbians here. Now that's counting Waverville and the outer areas. So here's a handful of people, but there are so many more people here in our community, not just lesbian, obviously, but that was who called in at that point. I think it's really important that we archive our lives, the struggles, and the negativity that has happened, because someone coming down the road is going to want to write a paper or do something, and they need to know what people went through. They need to, because it gives you strength to know that other people went through difficult times too. It's a difficult time now than it was for me, I think, but not for a kid out in the country. It's the same thing. They get thrown out of their house. And if there are, in fact, 800 homeless youth in the Asheville area, you know what, 600 of them are gay, lesbian, transgender, QA people. So what do? How do we come together and solve these problems? And I do think it is in coming together. That's where our power is. It isn't in separating out, you're trans, you're gay, you're lesbian, you're this. It's in getting together and coming forward and saying, we need housing, we're valuable. We changed this community. We helped build this community into what it is. And that can't be, I mean, 23 page, we could go on and on. So I think it's really important that somehow, like you said, we find a way to get along, to embrace the differences, to have fun with the differences. I had fun with my friends who were transgender. You know, I used to have a Christmas party, and the last people there were from the transgender community, from, you know, and we had a blast. I never thought anything about it. And now it worries me for people, you know, because of all this political stuff. But anyway.
I think that it's important for me personally that trans people that come after me know that in 2019 that our community resisted, but we also resisted. We didn't just sit here and kind of like take what everyone's throwing at us. We built our own communities. We kept each other safe. So I mean, I don't know. It's a lot, right? Like I think that, and it's also just very important that we don't ever forget that pride would not exist in the way that it is if it wasn't for trans women of color, like period, point blank. There's no like sugarcoating that. And I think that that's something that we oftentimes with like big corporate pride events, we kind of forget, kind of like lose touch with that. I don't really think that cops belong at Pride. And I think that I think that it's really important for us to, like you said, like keep our calendars and like our journals and our planners and just make sure that people know that we live lives that, I guess we are queer people, but we also live lives that are so much more than our queerness and so much more than our transness. And we're just like any other person, just like trying to get through life and bills and whatever takes to get by. So.
I guess my thoughts on that are that we just need to inspire. And if you can live your life and walk your own path, that hopefully that will inspire someone. And maybe someone that's not on the top rung of everything, not ahead of the class, not anything, but somebody that's got the grit and the gut in them that's going to stick it out. Because that's the people that usually end up sticking it out, is somebody that's not got attention, that doesn't seem like they're going to be all that, you know. So I would say inspire people. I wanted to be a professional volleyball, basketball, and softball official, and I did call college level, but it took me 27 years in ASA to get a national tournament, and everybody in Charlotte, when I call a regional tournament, says, well, why are you not at a national? And I'm like, well, because they think I'm a lesbian, and they're like, what? And, you know, when I got there, the first thing that was said to me is, where's your tattoos? The umpire-in-chief at a national tournament in Atlanta, you know, said, well, where's your tattoos, girl? And I was like, well, none of your business, boy. And he was a big old redneck fireman, you know, and I proved myself. I got in the F game, which is not the top game, but it was the top game, and I proved myself. And that's the only thing, is that even if they look down at you, even if they make you go to the back of the line, even if they say, we don't want you here, keep coming back. And inspire somebody else to do it. If they knock you down, then I hope somebody will step over me and go on for it. You know, just inspire, and that creates creativity, and then that creates longevity, and that's what's going to make us more powerful. But together, we have to stick together. We can't divide. It happened in the 70s. It took us till the mid-80s, late 80s to get us all back together again. And that's what I would say to everybody. Do not try and divide us. Keep us together so that we're an octopus. You know, we're not a school of fish. We're an octopus.
So it's this is actually a good bridge from the last question to this question, because sometimes I think you know, there's both, okay, solidarity is essential. Solidarity is what keeps queer communities and a lot of other communities alive. At the same time, sometimes things have to be talked about specifically because they don't get dealt with otherwise. And in some degree, I think some of what we see as tensions now are the legacies of things that weren't dealt with and were incorporated in the past. And that leads us to our next question. Asheville remains a harshly segregated city, and it has only become more so over the past decades. Everything from media depictions of queer communities now to historic collections, even though the North Carolina Rooms does depict the experiences of some people of color, reflects this. How do we fight that status quo, both now and in the histories we remember?
So I think that the best way to kind of fight the status quo with that and fight there being rooms just like full of white people is to actually intentionally build relationships with people of color that aren't just about you making yourself look better. It's about actually building a relationship that means something, and also just kind of acknowledging why people of color might not want to be in the room because they might feel a little bit ostracized, and just kind of acknowledging all the trauma that comes with that. And also, I think it's important to get to know people, like I said earlier, like yes, we're queer, yes, we're trans, but like get to know people as people, and get to know people as people who aren't always interacting in kind of like a social justice space. Because it can be a lot of pressure sometimes, and it can be a lot of like people putting you on a pedestal or people tokenizing you without even realizing that they're doing it. I mean, I guess people are like trying to do the best that they can, but a lot of times it just comes across as very like tokeny. So I think that that's the best way to come back.
I think you're right. I think it's just being people with each other, and who we are otherwise isn't the most important thing. I think if we can be people with each other, we can talk. We're more alike. We share 98% of our DNA with everyone. So what's that other 2%? You know, how different are we really? Most of us want a family of some sort. Most of us want to come home and be safe. And I think sometimes, you know, by separating out, and I do believe we have to deal with the separate issues in community, but when we meet each other, we're just people meeting each other, and I think you're right. It's just inviting people in is also something that's important. Going to communities where you are a minority is important, and not as the hero or the savior, but as a person being in groups. I spent a lot of time in Mexico where I am the only white person, and it's amazing how over time I'm family, and I think that's the thing. Make the family a real family, a good family. No, so.
Well, no, a lot of people don't really remember the history of Eagle Market Street. It has changed completely. They don't know the history of downtown Asheville and how very different it was before public housing became this selling, a marketed tool to get people to relinquish their property. The ownership of downtown was very different than it ever was historically. And so somebody like Dina Banks, who was a proprietress on Eagle Street at what was called the Ebony Bar and Grill. She was the longest continuously African-American owned business until she got snookered out of her business when they were going to renovate the Colette building. And she can tell you history. She used to have in her bar, the top of the bar was covered with photographs that she had taken for years and years and years. And on top of that was like plexiglass. And then her walls, on the back side of the walls, she had all these other pictures of people over the years, and plexiglass keeping them. So people would come back year after year. They may have left town and come back, you know, for Goombay or for a family reunion or for whatever it was, a funeral. And they'd come in and they'd be like, look, come here. That's me. That was me from the 1970s. That was me in 1984. Look, right there. Oh my goodness, look at theirs, you know, and call somebody's name. And she still has all of those pictures in storage. And I've asked her to archive those, you know. It'd be a fascinating display. You could do the whole wall here in the photographs that she took. But she was the first business on Eagle Street, Eagle Market Street, they always call it, the block, to ever put a bowl of condoms out. She was that first person. I went in there with Patricia and Jerry, and I asked her if she'd put a bowl of condoms out, and everybody in the community kind of looked at her and laughed. Why are you putting a bowl of condoms out here? What are you trying to promote or something, you know? And she says, no, what I'm trying to promote, what I'm trying to do is reduce our deaths. She saw what was going on, how HIV other things were decimating what she called the black community, her community, our community, the community. And so there's an exhibit, it's entitled The Faces of Asheville. I don't know if you participated in that, but if you look up The Faces of Asheville, it's a photographic archive of many of the people. She's in there. She has her cooking utensils from the Ebony Grill. She's a dynamite cook. Oh my gosh, she can make those sweet potato dumplings, and we always had fun together. I'm having dinner with her Saturday. But she also had her stethoscope, because for 40-some years now, she's been a CNA. And she has had to take care of some of the wealthiest of the Asheville elite, the Pattons, and Harry's on the hill, was Patton. He's one of her great patients, and just a wonderful friend. So Dina's got stories. Sit back and listen to some of those stories. We are a terribly segregated community. There are so many languages represented here, and the school systems are struggling to keep up. What do we do? I teach Spanish, but gosh, if I could teach the 57 other languages, or understand a little bit of each of those, maybe understand a little bit more culture, maybe I could travel outside of here and get an idea of what other people like to do, and the music they listen to, and the house parties that they used to create, because perhaps they couldn't go to certain areas or to certain bars, couldn't feel necessarily welcomed or afford things. People do different things. And so if you ever get invited to a house party or to a picnic or a quinceañera or something, go. Step out of what might be your comfort zone, and realize just sharing this space and place called Earth for a very short time.
Also, another thing real quick is just to support local art and go to the local punk shows and basement shows that you see flyers for, just because I feel like that could kind of bridge the gap between kind of all the generations that are represented. I was just saying that I think it would be really helpful if you would start supporting local young queer artists and going to shows that you see flyers and stuff. I think that would really bridge the gap between the generations that are represented in Asheville.
I'm an artist, sort of, kind of got back into ceramics again, but I agree with you on that the different art and the diversity of it, and the finessed artist as opposed to the beginning artist, and free speech artist, and outrageous artist, which, Warhol's a little bit crazy, but look at him, so we've got some, probably Andy Warhols and some Picassos here living in Asheville right now, just starting out, so that would be a good starting point, because art always pulls people together, because it allows you to see it and then think, and you develop it in your own thought process, and it's maybe totally different than anybody else, but pulling the people together, and I've always wanted to see a museum of the drag queens' dresses that have passed. I have too. I have their dresses, their high heels, their wigs, in boxes, because when they pass, the owners would say, well, what are we going to do this? And I'd say, I'll take them. So I've kept them, and that is as far as kings also, because we do deserve a right down the road of history and herstory. We deserve a right to walk down that road with anybody and everybody, but I think we're also more encompassing than a lot of people. We're like bending a willow tree, we'll bend. We'll bend to try to get what we want, or try to get people to listen, and I think once we get them in, we should turn into an oak and say, you're not going to, you listen to me, You're going to stay here, you're going to listen, But I think the future is bright. I just think that we have to make sure we hold on to our little niche of history that will allow us to not fight the breweries, but to say, we're a part of this, and if it's gallery showings and we put things together, I'm sure there's lots of places in town that would offer space for that. And that's a start, because it gets people to thinking, and people can go and see stuff on their own, but I think the future's bright. I don't want to be around a lot of some of the stuff that's going on in Asheville, because I just don't like loud, noisy crowds, and it's crazy since I'm a bartender. But at least when I have that bar in front of me, I've got a space. I'm not there. I'm over here, and I'm watching everything. But create plays, you know, do one woman, one man shows, one trans shows, and put them all together and allow people to do things like that so that it'll bring us all together and bring an understanding, because I've been around for 45 years in the gay community, and I still don't understand all the language and the pronouns, and I'm trying to learn.
It's pretty straightforward in a lot of ways, but
But if you ask, sometimes you get jumped in your throat, you know, it's like, why don't you know that? And I'm like, well, because I'm old, you know, and when I came up, there was just 2 genders or 3, and I had
there were people
trans
with multiple
friends.
genders back then.
Oh, I know, I knew Holly. I was the first person to serve Holly a drink because the other bartenders wouldn't. And she was the first trans person that walked in a gay bar. And yeah, I knew lots of them, but I'm just saying, I just want to understand, I want to learn, even if I'm 75, I want to learn. And I want you to teach me, and teach me in a way that I can understand it. That's all I ask. In the same thing goes both ways. You know, we want to understand. We don't want to alienate ourselves from trans people or bi people or anybody for that matter. You know, trans people come up here from Asheville, from South Carolina, Georgia. I get phone calls, and and the first person I call is Holly, is Beloved. And we get them in, we try to get them in somewhere, and we get them housed at least until we can get them to a place that they're safe, because they're leaving because they're being afraid of being murdered. And they're coming to Asheville because it's a safe place. And you don't talk about it much because they follow them here. So Asheville does a big thing as far as any kind of trans person that's running comes to Asheville, and there's a big group of people that don't really get anything known about them because they're just trying to save lives, and they don't want attention. But I think that's another thing, is to try to understand the fear of, my family wants to kill me, and it's serious, to truly understand what that might mean to a person, and how terrified they could be to think that their own people, and it's happening, you know, want to hurt them. It's hard for me to believe, but it happens.
I can believe it.
Yeah, I believe it, and then I said, you know, my brothers didn't like me because they thought I was gay, but they didn't ever threaten to kill me. And I tried a couple of times maybe, but, you know, threw me out of trees, but I'm just saying it's a reality to people that run and are terrified. And it's just like domestic violence, but it's a different kind of violence. You know, we need to accept that and try and understand and be all inclusive in our community.
So I think one thing that's essential to say about queer communities is that I think at our most powerful, we maintain solidarity, but at the same time that people remain accountable for their own actions, and that I think applies whether we're 20 or 80 or 90 or 100. These struggles do not end, and our necessity to work on them and does not end, and at its best, queerness is a destruction of binaries and what we're told we have to be. And I think it's always important to keep that in mind. It's interesting, the first reference to trans people comes from Sumerian poetry. We have always been here. Non-binary people, we have always been here, we will always be here. So I think it's worth keeping that in mind. A lot of what we see is not, I think, new. It's just, old masks coming off and old barriers breaking. On that note, so from community newsletters to online media, the methods LGBT plus communities use to inform and organize has changed over time, and drastically in a lot of ways. I know some of our panelists have worked with LGBT plus media, with queer media over the years. What changes have you seen in that time, and what media and methods of communication are particularly important to preserve going forward? If you want to.
So I think that there's definitely more representation for people in the media that I couldn't even have dreamed of when I was 10. I couldn't have dreamed of shows like Pose or anything other than the really weird storyline in Glee existing and people actually liking it. I also think that the internet has served a really great purpose for queer people, because a lot of times queer people live in towns where there are no other queer people that they know of. So things like Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that are really beneficial for them, and honestly are kind of a lifeline, because it gets lonely when you're a young queer person and you're in your early teens or late teens, and you're kind of like figuring yourself out like every teenager does, but then you like have this layer of organizer, this layer of transness workbook, and you're kind of like trying to meet people and friends, but there's no one around you who understands you. So like when I was 13, I didn't have like Instagram and Facebook, but I think kids now like have developed entire communities and like subcultures, which I think is really awesome. I think that it's really going to serve a really real purpose in kind of preserving our history.
I don't know what I think about all the internet stuff. I think it's important, I think it's here to stay, but I think sometimes it's abstract, where you're not physically in space with each other. And it gives you an idea that there's community out there, but is there community right here next to you? And I'm not sure, that I buy it. I see people that seem incredibly lonely on the internet because they're on the internet all day long, instead of out in the world with other people. So, and I'm older, so, I'm not a kid, and it might work better if you were younger, but I'm also on the internet. In terms of the media, I think it's important, and I think it's providing some kind of community. But I also think we have to really, really work to create a community where people are touching, talking, being with each other, supporting each other, protecting each other, and that kind of stuff, physically, literally physical violence in space.
I guess I was lucky. I had a great public speaking teacher in 12th grade, Miss Thomas. And that was probably one of the greater classes I ever took besides typing. Those are the two, I think, classes I ever took. Because it has allowed me to be able to speak, to be able to feel comfortable with people, either on a panel or in front of people. I'm very lucky. Why anybody would ever invite me to come back and speak sometimes is always bewildering. But I'm more of a paper person. People laugh me out because I don't have a cell phone. I drive a 1986 Toyota pickup truck that has an AM radio in it. So, the media really doesn't, it's not about me. I'm more like, I'd rather be involved. I was there at 6:30, at Blue Ridge Pride, helping to set up whatever. I like to be activated. I like to be involved, be next to you, to be working with you. I've seen Grindr over people's shoulders. People don't seem thrilled by it either. I mean, it's a thrill for a little bit, and like a picture once in a while, all the 27,000 other websites. I don't know, they seem superficial to me, but I don't want to sound judgmental either. There must be something about it because they keep going. My cousin's little 6-year-old daughter, she said, "Where's your cell phone?" And I said, "I don't have one, I have a plug-in-the-wall phone." She said, "Daddy, what's a plug-in-the-wall phone?" I still have one of those kinds of phones. You have to leave a message for me, sticks and stones or whatever, but I'm very lucky to have been able to express myself through newspapers that we had, and now a lot of those are online, so I'll have a letter to the editor that not expressed, for example, tomorrow. But it's because I like to make my voice heard and my opinions heard. Are you willing to do that? Then why not? Then use the media. But I don't know a whole lot more about it. I'm just kind of old-timey too. You've got a bunch of old-timers on here. It'd be interesting to have some younger generations folks to come through. Maybe if we had panel discussions once a month here, how it might look to increase the archive of the voices, intergenerational. I mean, there's the LGBT elder advocates, they had their senior prom, and that's all fun and games, but what are we doing together in generational experiences sometimes?
Well, I guess I like the media. I have 10,000 pictures on my phone. And I used to freak out because I didn't know what the cloud was and how to do anything like that. But now that I know my pictures are saved, I've got 115 people that are my friends that have passed away on there. And I go back and look at them. And I put some pictures up from the old days, and people are like sending me private message. And I'm like, "Oh my God, Rosie, oh my God, there's only 2 people in that picture alive." And I'm like, I know I was there. And I said, we have to give them respect by remembering them. And to speak of them is remembering and echoing their history and their memory. But I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword. And I'm on there probably way too much, but I try to put positive things. I'm trying to get away from being so political. on there, not inside myself. But I think it's great as long as you don't go and get all, get wound up in it that you end up falling on the sword. Define it and keep it on either side of that sword, because it's not going away. It's only getting bigger. I think we need more precautions, and we need more things that should be stopped. I think hate speech of any sort should not be allowed. I think threats, I think telling people to commit suicide should not be allowed. I'm a veteran, and I can't tell you how many veterans kill themselves because they just can't get a doggone appointment. And so I think it's a good thing because it has connected the right people together. Sometimes it doesn't connect good people, but for the most part, I think it's here, it's going to stay, and we need to learn it and use it as a tool, to create something so we can go forward. And the kids, they don't want to help him. I can tell you, like, oh my God, how do I do this? They're like, oh, I don't have time to do that. But, learn as much as you can and use it as a tool, because that's what it is. And I think it's brought us together. I think we've found people that we never would have found if it hadn't been for Facebook and for the internet. And I, like, if somebody says, that's not right, I go Google it, I'm guilty. And I don't have an Alexa. I would probably sit around crazy laughing because my cats would be looking at me all the time. And I only have two. I'm a crazy cat lady yet. But I think it's a great thing. It's a great tool. And I think the kids could teach us a lot. But I think that it's something we've just got to incorporate it into our lives, because I think we need it. I think it's something we need, but like I say, it's a double-edged sword, so don't get too far on either side or you can fall on the sword.
Interesting, as someone who runs a local media organization and started out in print journalism, I'm in my late 30s, so I kind of saw some of that transition, to use a term. And I would be homeless right now if online media and online news publications and online funding weren't something that was possible now in a way that it wasn't before. So definitely it broadened, I think, kind of that reach. And I think sometimes it's easy to miss how much social media overlaps with, I'm connecting on social media with people that I'm going to meet up with, that I'm going to talk to, who I know well. And I think to some degree it does allow, especially queer communities, to stay in touch more and organize more quickly. At the same time, a lot of people who want us dead are using it for the exact same thing. And so I think it has definitely changed the terrain in ways that both made some things more dangerous and some things more powerful. So that's worth noting. Going on to something else that kind of is an ongoing theme in queer communities, which also changed a lot. Queer nightlife and spaces have played a key role in LGBT+ communities over the decades. How have these scenes and spaces changed over time, and what is their importance both past and present?
People always complain that the gay bar scene is lost, and we used to be thought of as this quote-unquote San Francisco of the East, as all gay, all LGBT, whatever. Gay bars they're struggling. I mean, most of them closed down. You say, well, Henry's is a gay bar, but it's really a people bar anymore. Same thing with Scandals, Tressa's was lesbian owned and operated, but it's gone. Hairspray's gone, Rose's got a whole list of bars that have come and gone. So in other big cities too, I think they're struggling. So where do we go? People say, oh, you can go anywhere. You're accepted everywhere. Not if I'm all hugged up with my husband, if I kiss him or something like that, or hold his hand, everybody's staring at me, making me feel weird, and ridiculed. I'm not comfortable everywhere like that. It was a safe zone for us. The same thing for the Cage, what it was. It's now a gentrified bunch of restaurants and $1 million apartments and high-end hotels. You can't be spinning around there 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, hanging out on the side of the corner, talking to people, going around the backside of the alley if you met somebody who wanted to, like whatever. Part of what we did is because we didn't have any place to go. You kind of had to hide out. You were scared away and had to be precautious and those kinds of things. So it's changed. We're everywhere like tin cans, but I'm not sure that we're quite fully accepted everywhere.
Yeah, I used to go to bars to dance, and I wouldn't know where to go today, to tell you the truth. My nightlife consists of 2 cats, a dog, and Midsummer Mysteries at this point. So, but I used to go, and I used to enjoy Tressa's and various places, and Henry's, and especially when it was downtown. But I don't know how it's changing. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, most of the people I know go to work, go home, and do stuff on the weekends. You know, they're not out in bars, most of them. And so that's sort of my take on the nightlife. And I don't know if it's because I've gotten older, because the bars disappeared is what happened as far as, or the comfort of the bars disappeared, I think. You know, there were more, even at Tressa's, you know, it got more and more people that weren't LGBT. And, you know, it was, sometimes people were looking at you like you were from outer space or something. And that's not the most comfortable place to go dancing, but, you know, you can.
So, I think that it's kind of like you said earlier, like I think back in the day, like it kind of used to be that bars were like a church and like it's where people would go, like if somebody died or like whatever. And I think that now it's kind of this thing where gay bars have kind of been like commodified and are sold to people as this kind of like spectacle. And I think that people who come to places like that don't realize that like this is one of the only places that people have to feel safe. And so like I can see why like people wouldn't want to go out to bars. Also like for me, trans women a lot of times aren't really welcomed in gay bars. A lot of times there's like a lot of cattiness and a lot of like weird jealousy and just like kind of weird vibes that go on. But I think now we're kind of headed towards a place where a lot of people are kind of realizing that for years and years, I think that like a lot of alcohol companies, like cigarette companies, have preyed on the LGBT community. And so I think that a lot of people now are sober and are kind of creating more sober spaces and creating more spaces that aren't just about going out and drinking, but are about kind of building community with each other and doing things together. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I think that it's also kind of going to a place where things are just more like online, because you can FaceTime people, like there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's like all types of ways for people to meet on the internet. You can even meet on the internet and then like decide that you want to meet up somewhere like in person. And I think that's a great thing, because I don't really want to spend my like Friday night surrounded by like bachelor parties and people who like actually hate me, but like the music's really good or the drinks are cheap, you know, so.
Well, I think the gay bars, I think Jerry Connors mentioned in his little, he wrote up a little thing on Facebook because he was memorialized this weekend. And thank you, Tina, for that, because he's a big part of our community. And I think the bars, thank God Derek owns his building, but because that's kind of an integral thing to have and to be able to be established and to be able to stay. And we have karaoke and we have our potluck next Sunday, so we kind of have always, O. Henry's has been known as the Cheers bar, and more people that come in, and this is straight kids, this is young kids, this is bi kids, this is all kids are like, oh, we've never been here before, this is great. We're just kind of known that we're all inclusive, and we don't put up with anybody calling anybody names, and we don't put up with anybody demeaning or trying to be antagonizing or bullying to anybody. We'll get them out of there and tell them to get out. But as far as it being long-term in Asheville, if you're on one of the big money streets, then you better be making big money. And then it's the alcohol's the way you make the money. So it's been in our environment for forever. You know, the tea dances and everything like that used to happen, and they still are starting to have them again at banks. But I think it's going to be hard to have a lot of gay bars. That's why I said I always wanted to buy the Elks Club in terms of you put a swimming pool in the back, put a fence around it, call it a country club, so that everybody could come and party and or not, and have a good time. Because Michael doesn't drink. Michael comes in, and I look forward to knowing he's coming through the door. My buddy's here, and I've known him as long as he's been to town. And there's lots of people that don't drink, and you don't have to drink if you don't want to. Don't ever feel like that's a requirement. If that's not what you want to do, then don't do it. But to sustain in Asheville, it's going to take someone that owns their property, unless they have the volume and the capacity to turn over that big high rent. Because, I mean, rent, when you're paying $5,000 a month plus for a space, you gotta turn over a lot of stuff to make that kind of money and pay your people and buy product and things like that. But I think there'll always be a couple, but I think it's not a fade out type thing, but it's certainly not the 8 bars we used to have a long time ago. So it's definitely times that need to change in that.
So this is actually something worth mentioning as well. It ties into the stuff we were talking about gentrification and queer communities as working class communities. A lot of the workforce in bars around here still is queer. And it's interesting also, we have the first unionized bar in the state. It's the Crow and Quill, and the staff there is overwhelmingly queer and trans. And I think you want to talk about long-term in addition to talking about, okay, try to have queer-owned businesses own their own property. I think unionized queer workforces would change the dynamic of a lot of the more predatory aspects of the service industry here and make it a lot harder to kick out queer communities and spaces. So yeah, on that, we have a little bit of time left for questions here, and I will be happy to take some questions from the audience for our panelists about any of the topics we've been discussing. Yes?
First, just a public service announcement. Did anyone, or does anyone know someone who may have left a $300 set of keys to a Ford on a queer as fuck lanyard at the festival? Because I have. I just thought this would be a good Okay.
A lot of my friends strange, but I'm glad the word's been communicated.
I'm Tina White. I'm the executive director for Blue Ridge Pride. I did want to make 3 offers that I think are very relevant to what you just said. I've quietly restructured our finances so that when we make a surplus, it goes into what is called the Blue Ridge Pride Community Partner Fund. Once it's there, I can't touch it. William Brewery called us and said, could we give you profits from our beer? I said, I'll tell you what, why don't you give them directly to that fund? So my goal has been long-term to get as much money going back to this community as possible. That money, and this is the offer or the invitation, that money is controlled by the board. I would love to see some of the faces in here on that board, and I'm trying to move them to a quarterly meeting structure so that it's not such a burden on people, because I want that fund controlled by the community. So anyone, see me afterwards if you want. We just raised $8,500 for the Movies and Mixer series. I have ambitions to get a lot more. So please, I'd love to have you all involved in deciding what happens to that money. The second is, I just sent a letter. We tried an experiment at this year's festival where we set up an area for queer artists. We're going to debrief. I heard they had a lot of fun. I don't know how it went. But I challenged them today. I said I'm happy to do it again next year, but I'd love to do a year-long program. I really am intent that we find ways to support the community. I'm new to it, so you all have to help me figure out how to make those connections, but I would love to see that expand, and if anyone wants to be involved. And the third, listening to you, I was thinking about the Oral History Project, and we're partnering some on that. We're working with UNCA, and as is typical, we start with a volunteer focus. I'm happy. I'd have to talk to my board. We have to look at our finances. I'm happy to pay people to contribute stories or artifacts as long as I can work that out, the economics. And again, so if someone has thoughts on how we can do that, we did well in this year's festival. We've lost some years. This year we did well. And I want to meet with my board in November. I'd love to see some of you on that board to talk about what we should be doing with that. So,
Are y'all going to end bank sponsorships and stop cooperating with the APD?
I'm sorry?
Are y'all going to end the bank sponsorships and stop cooperating with the APD?
I'm happy to answer that. The quick answer is no, we won't stop those, at least until someone gives me more information. I was unaware that anyone was thrown out of the park until you just said that. I was aware because my wife talked to the protesters. She told me about what the conversations were like. They could learn to be a little more civil to their public.
Quiet doesn't get things done.
They were not effective at winning her heart over, and she came to talk to them and learn. But that's a separate story. I was glad there were protesters there. I wish I'd known. I think that a movement needs different parties. I think it needs people with sharp sticks. When I work at Human Rights Campaign, we sometimes carry a very sharp stick. I believe that Blue Ridge Pride's role in the community is very different. I think that our role is to create a common space. I am very determined to be careful about excluding anyone, because I get calls everywhere about people who should not be there. I have thoroughly researched the facts, and and I don't want this to come about me, because Blue Ridge Pride is an organization, but I thoroughly researched that, because I had to think about that and how I feel about it. There is a lot of merit to the protest. There is also a lot of misinformation, and I would have to have someone with a much sharper pencil show me why I should pick out a class of corporations who have LGBTQ employees who are happy that we're there. When we get approached by corporations, it's not their Madison Avenue offices, it's their local employees who are asking them to have a presence at that. Now, you can debate that, you can disagree with that, but it's not as simple as you seem to be portraying it, where we should simply keep them out.
They fund private prisons. Just this, if your board wants to represent the community as a whole, I think those are two things you need to consider, and they need to be considered a long time ago.
Well, I can't speak to the past. I am happy to take that up. What I'm saying is, if you're asking me on the moment, on the spot, to give you an answer, I haven't been presented with enough evidence to convince me to take such a decision. I am more than happy to do it privately or publicly. I really want to be transparent. I'm not trying to hide that. But I get calls every year, and for the APD, I have serious issues with the APD, but I also have serious issues with anyone who classifies and labels someone based on any one characteristic. We had 8 officers there who were exemplary on Saturday. I watched them. I had people on my team working with them, and I'm not going to denigrate them, and I am going to thank them, because I believe that it's our role at the festival to create a very gracious atmosphere that is welcoming to all. Let me give you one example outside our community. I was talking to Shindig on the Green. They made the incredible assertion that they had a lot of diversity at a city hall meeting. And I met with them afterwards and talked about how not just our queer LGBT community, I have friends in the Black community who lived here forever in Asheville, and they tell me they love that music, but they don't feel safe there. And I talked to them about that. And to their credit, 2 weeks later, they issued an invitation to all the other minority festivals to come and table at Shindig on the Green. We were the only one to take them up on it. Our team thought I was putting them in harm's way, so we had a discussion about that. They not only welcomed us, the entire audience applauded our presence. And I think that's an example where, by reaching across and playing the role we try to play, we are trying to enlarge the space that we feel welcome in. I think that's an important role, and I am very proud that we play it.
Questions? Yes.
So I wanted to, or did you mean me, David?
Right beside.
Oh, sorry.
Do I have to introduce myself? Hi, I'm Chad Bate. I'm a local entertainer. And I wondered what the panel thought was the best methods for entertainers and artists and things like that. I personally run a freak show and drag shows and things like that. And I tried to go to different venues, but I wonder what the panel would think are good methods to expand what, in my opinion, it seems queer identity is expanding to other places, whether it's the auditorium or Sly Rock, or these are becoming more acceptable spaces. What sort of advice would any of you offer for being an artist and attempting to branch out and bring these different communities you spoke of and fracture together in different ways? How can we as artists help everyone come together better so that we're not feeling so distant? Because as an artist, I feel ostracized by a large part of this community. I am not welcome in many establishments because I'm too messy or too outspoken or too aggressive, or I don't follow particular rules in what seems like a hierarchy in this town of like people that dictate where you can and cannot be. So what sort of advice would y'all offer to break down those barriers for an artist to explore different venues and such, and bring more communities together in that way?
I guess I'll start since I have the mic. I think that it's really important when you're creating art and you're kind of trying to like branch out into like different venues and stuff like that, right? It's important to just keep track of like who you are and like never let that go. But it's also really important to kind of market yourself to broader like audiences. So like market yourself to people who you don't even think would come to your shows, because you never know. Because it seems to me like there's an entire room of people who like want our like queer community, like all the generations in our community to come together. So I mean, that's my advice. I'm not an artist, but that's what I would do when I would say.
Well, I've been working in the bar business a long time, but I've thought about this for Asheville, and I know what you're talking about. There's stigma with certain bars and certain entertainers, and it's always been that way. And I love your work. I know you're out there, but I love it because you make people go, whoa, and that's what I like. That's what art's supposed to do, is question yourself and ask questions. And I think my suggestion would be get with the bar owners and see if you could do a pop-up show. And hit the show, on a Friday night or a night that they would say that'd be a good night to do that, and do a pop-up show, put it together so that it's not more than 30 minutes long. You got everything ready to go, you got your music ready to go, and let them see if they would allow you to do a pop-up show before their show, and bounce all over town. I remember in the day back when Pride on Fridays, the three biggest entertainers in each bar would go to each other's bar, and they would have a show prior to the show, and it was great because they put them in the back of trucks, they drove them all over Asheville, they was all over Asheville, and before Pride the next day, and they popped up at each bar. At that time it was at Henry's, Scandals, and forget what it was Tracks, and it went over great, and they did it for a couple of years. But since everybody loves pop-up stuff, talk to the owners and see if they will allow you to do a pop-up show, and that we, talk to them what you're going to do. I know you don't want to tell people what you're going to do, because you shocked me the last time you were at Henry's. I was like, whoa, and I loved it, because I thought you were going there and you went way over there. So that's the way it's supposed to be. But I would talk to the owners and see maybe if you could do a pop-up show and hit some of the bars, and then if they liked it and had a good conversation about it, and if people talk about it, that makes them want to say, yeah, I'll do that too.
Yeah, I think I'm an artist too, and I think, you go through periods where it's tough. Just keep going and don't let it change you. Figure out if you need to rent a place, even if it's a garage, and you can get people there. Get them to know you, and just don't let people's opinions change what you're about, because if you've got something different and you've got something that you want to put out there and that's what you want to do it. I did a series on my mother as she descended into Alzheimer's, and it scared women to death. So I couldn't get into these shows that were juried by women for years, but men juried me in all the time. And I thought, well, that is really weird. Why is that happening? So, but, it scared women. Here was this old woman who had lost her mind, and they were tough photographs. But so be tough, That's all I can tell you, is really be tough. Go to places like she said, where you're not as weird, and then go to the places where you're the weirdest person there and try to get your show in, because it works in the long run.
And I also think marketing, I was always in my marketing class, the promotion is the P that's most important. You can have the product and the price and the place, but without the promotion. So I don't know if the Chamber of Commerce, has a section of what's the best entertainment, what's the most artistic entertainment of Asheville, special collections of, your flyers and where you'll be, that kind of thing. Is there some media coverage, whether it's, David covers you in a story that's online, or whether there's other stories. I've seen plenty of Wilma Holborn, for example, from the Beer City Sisters in the Mountain Express, about a brunch, a drag brunch or something. So we've seen some of that come out, and drag is different, and it's not quite as campy. It's a little bit more eccentric sometimes, and walking down the street. when we had For Fuck's Sake there last week, you know, Miss Knightley walked down the street and I watched all the tourists just right behind her going, wow, did you see that? Did you see that? Did you see that? You know? But to walk the streets a little bit and maybe do some entertainment on the street, talk about pop up in a bar. What about having a permit to do the busking, the permit on a corner somewhere?
Actually, you don't need a permit for busking in Asheville.
Say again?
You don't need a permit for busking in Asheville.
Okay, then
So,
There you go.
jump the fuck up and do it then. You know, don't let me stop because of my ignorance, but I'm just saying, like, where else might we be? And where might you be? And who's going to put the bucket out there and watch the dollar so if somebody doesn't steal it from you, you know, have a bat, you know, a guard. I wonder if something like that, and not just at night, but what about in the afternoons when the most tourists are downtown? Show them what your art is and have them remember it, and then tell, you know, gosh, we were in Asheville, it was the middle of the afternoon, and oh my gosh, you would not believe the show we saw. You know, I don't know.
I also think doing some YouTube videos, getting it on Facebook, that kind of stuff where you can refer people to it, and that helps. You know, and people are watching YouTube like crazy, and it's fairly inexpensive. Everybody's got a camera now, and just pick your thing and just do it. You know, get it up there.
do we have time for one more question, Catherine?
Yeah, we could probably have, as long as we're out of here by 7:40.
Another question? Yes.
I was not here at the time where there was the newspaper that you read at some point. Is there a space or a need for that kind of thing here in town?
I don't know.
Or is that being filled online now for people? And I was just wondering, like you were saying that you're not seeing flags as much, or even decals on cars, and I'm kind of feeling that too.
We used to have at gay bookstores the Rainbow's End, and so you could get stickers and flags and
Yeah.
blankets and chairs and magazines and whatever, jewelry. We don't have that anymore. I don't know.
Like, I feel that things are more diffuse in some good ways, but also some bad ways.
But you know about gayashevillennc.com, right?
Yeah, and I know that there's things like that, but it's different than
Yeah, I mean, it's different than being able to pick up a paper
yeah,
because,
or even
like,
a column in something else. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I'm not hearing this.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking on it after hearing it.
yeah, well, papers are having a harder and harder time keeping going
Yes.
at all zero. I mean, in terms of that, so a specific paper, you know, would have to be really hit, you know, and people, you know, like if I started one, you couldn't afford to pay people initially and that kind of stuff. And you've got so many writers trying to live that are being pushed out like you and all over the place. Just, I mean, I can't remember, somebody just fired or let go of a bunch of their writers in New York. And I think so, you know, I think going like, you know, going to the digital is easier, and you can ask people to pay for what you're doing, you know, and they will. They do. I do.
There is the Urban News, for example. Johnny Grant is the publisher, and she's always in need of advertising, right? But she's been open to having my columns in there. You got a column, maybe you could be that writer, whether it's your name and, you know, nom de plume or whatever, but that there be some LGBT kind of issues. She says she's the gateway to diversity and that sort of thing. So one of her editors is one of our gay community members. You know, maybe she'd be open to that.
Okay. Yes.
I have a question, and let me just preface it by I am a deacon in a Baptist church, and I've been working on trying to figure out the pronoun thing. And I've been to one workshop or one presentation of it, and so far I've come away more confused than I ever was, because I saw, I think someone added Spanish to it, to the pronoun list and everything.
Yes, all initials.
How does somebody like me start? And then someone sort of alluded to, you just asked Mr. Harris. I'm like, it's appropriate time to ask, and how do you do that? So that's where I'm just trying to learn the pronouns.
So, I mean, basically, if someone says, hey, when I use myself as an example, my pronouns are I use she, her, they, them, either works. you respect that. You know, if it's a mistakes made, you quickly correct. I know there are organizations like Transmission that do offer trainings and education stuff. I found Transmission to be an excellent resource on a lot of fronts. But a lot of it is, you know, if, for example, you know, if someone goes out of their way to mispronounce someone's name, for example, does not have the same weight that misgendering does, but people know that's an insult. It's immediately perceived. That is clearly meant to be an insult. And if someone corrects or says, oh no, my name is such and such, you know, people should respect that. By the same token, you know, someone's pronouns are what they say they are. And a lot of it, I think, is just listening to people and respecting people. We are who we say we are. And it's I think, pretty straightforward if people are acting in good faith.
I was going to say, I think his question was more, when is the proper time to ask somebody if you're just now being introduced?
So I know some people do pronoun introductions, you know, in common kind of social settings. Not everyone does. There's a lot of things to navigate with that. You know, generally, like a lot of things, there's not I think a single rule, but basically if someone asserts their pronouns, just listen. I think is generally, that solves a lot of interactions. You know, and it's interesting because some very simple things have a big impact. You know, the city of Asheville, which is supposedly a liberal city government, refused for a year and a half to change, you know, when they were sending me a letter or responding to records request, refused to change, you know, an R to an S. Simple as that. Even after they were repeatedly asked, and all it would have taken is that's such a simple step. So clearly, at that point, you know someone's meaning a level of disrespect. A lot of it is, you know, basic courtesy. You listen to someone, you accept them for who they are, and you accept that their assertions about the life they've lived and the pronouns they use are the correct ones, and you go from there. Catherine, you good on time?
You have 2 minutes, so if anyone else wants to answer that question.
Yes, Jessica.
One thing I would suggest is that whatever you ask, especially if you're talking to trans people, just ask politely. Most of us are glad to answer. I made a point when I was going out to the bars years ago, Rosie knows this, that anybody can come up and ask me anything. And as long as people are polite and nice, and you treat the person with respect, you're going to get respect back. And that's the best way I can think of to do it. And I had to say, what pronouns would you prefer? And when they tell you, do that.
Is that the first question I asked? What pronouns do you prefer?
Or if it comes up, you know, you ask it whenever you feel comfortable asking, but ask politely and mean it.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because I went to one workshop, and next thing you know, it was open up to a galaxy of around the world.
A wonderful galaxy. I love it. And you know, and that's the thing. There's always more out there. There's always more to learn. I think with the past or the present. And yeah, I think a lot of it is people engage in good faith, and there isn't bigotry there. I think generally interactions go pretty well.
Well, that's all we have
Yes.
time for. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. I think this is a really nice discussion. Again, this is sponsored by the Friends of the North Carolina Room. We really invite you to be a friend of the North Carolina Room. And I want to let you know that October 17th through the 20th, we're hosting a pop-up exhibit of our LGBT archival materials. Thankfully, we're doing that with a $500 grant from Blue Ridge Pride from their community fund. We're really thankful for that. That's at Banks Avenue Bar. It's on Banks Avenue, just down from Catawba, if you're familiar with where that is. You can just look at that on our Facebook page. We'll keep you updated. And again, thanks for coming.
What was the date again?
October 17th through the 20th. So it's a long weekend, Thursday through Sunday.
And thank you to our panelists for your
Yes,
time.
thank you.